First of all, thank you everyone for joining us, and a particularly big thank you to our experts today. My name's Rebecca Siciliano and I'm the Managing Director at Tiger Recruitment. We're all really excited about today's event because I know we've got some fantastic knowledge on this webinar, and we're really keen to share a lot of information with our clients that are sort of trying to navigate their way through things at the moment and sort of look at the best way through. The format for today, obviously, I'm going to be asking you guys all some questions, and then for everyone that's joined in to attend today, we're going to have an opportunity for you to ask some questions at the end through the Q&A function. We'll try and answer as many questions as we can on this webinar, but anything that we can't respond to, if you just email us at Tiger, and we'll try and come back to you from there. So I guess first off, I'm going to introduce our three experts. First of all, we have Ruth Cooper-Dickson. Ruth is the founder of Shamps, and Shamps is a wellbeing consultancy that works with businesses to deliver tailored workshops and mental health first aid courses and coaching to staff. We've also got Julie Osborn on the call. Julie is a business psychologist who works with teams and individuals. She specialises in stress management, personal development, mental health, and organisational development. And finally, we have Jo Yarker. Jo is the director of Affinity Health at Work. She is also an associate professor at Kingston Business School. She leads the Masters and Professional Doctorate programs in Occupational and Business Psychology. Her research has been sponsored by organisations including the CIPD. So I'm sure you can all see we've got a really impressive panel here. Let's sort of kick things off straight away. I think sort of one of the things that we've been asked the most, I guess it's looking at the challenges that businesses are facing at the moment. So I thought I'd ask you, I might sort of start by directing this to you, Jo. What would you say is the biggest challenge that your clients are finding during the current situation?
It's incredibly hard. Every organisation has different priorities and different challenges. And I think we've moved from the firefighting that we saw in the first few weeks, where people were really thinking, how do we mobilise people to get home? How do we set up offices at home? How do we manage our workforce that need to stay on the ground? And now the challenge really feels, how do we manage this deep want to prioritise well-being and need to prioritise well-being with, if we need our businesses to survive, what do we need from our employees? So I think that's one challenge, is managing that delicate balance between caring for people but also trying to meet the priorities. And then increasingly we're having discussions around how do we support the return process and what that's going to look like. And it's a real mind boggle. So thinking about who's going to return, when are they going to return, how are they going to return? And we've got so many different groups that we need to consider in that process, that I think that now is the challenge that's facing people.
Definitely. And Ruth, are you seeing anything different from your clients?
I mean, same as Jo said. I mean, it does vary. I think there's a couple of things though that we found is that, knowing that initially it was almost like you're working from home, but actually it's working from home during a crisis. So there's obviously different nuances to that. And we're finding we've been asked a lot to have sessions where we support parents, or we talk about how parents can manage their mental health alongside homeschooling, because obviously the children haven't gone back to school. I think there was an expectation potentially in the early days that children would go back to school after Easter, and that's not happened. So I think trying to work from home, and perhaps if you've got partners at home working and you've got homeschooling alongside that, I think that's causing more friction around making sure those priorities are being met. I think, as Jo said, that those priorities are now shifting and changing back to, well, what's the focus, where were we on our original track around strategy? Is that still the same, or has that changed? And I think because when we were going into, we work with all sorts of different types of organizations, as I'm sure my colleagues do on the panel, and I don't think there's any organization that's, was saying before COVID, oh, we've got loads of resource and we've got loads of budget. Everyone's been under that stretch strain on the pressure curve, and I think that whole baseline pressure shifted for everybody. So therefore there's a real danger, and I think the point about that transition back, actually, are we going to see people coming back into the workplace that are going to need even more increasing support with regards to mental health, and also just navigating what this new world of work looks like?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think if you go back to the beginning of all this, the initial challenges and the initial stress might have been around setting up at home and where people were going to work and establish their home working space. But now we're more than 5 weeks in for a lot of people, and there are whole new challenges, like when is it going to go back to normal? How are we going to adjust when we are back in the office as well? So yeah, there's been a lot for people to sort of navigate through. Do you think there's been anything surprising that's come out of your conversations with clients that perhaps you weren't expecting to hear through all of this? Julie, if you can sort of let us know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think a real positive for me about working with people throughout this time is how resourceful and creative and resilient people can be. So having to suddenly change to working from home, having jobs adjusted so that your usual job you can't do if you're customer facing, for example, and suddenly you're doing a whole load of admin type tasks and paperwork, that's a massive transition for anyone. But now clients I'm working with, they're adapting to working from home, homeschooling kids, as Ruth was mentioning, and also adapting to this whole, new world that we find ourselves in. So I've been just so surprised how resilient people that I work with have been, and what they're able to do is use strategies that they've used as somebody with ongoing mental health difficulties to help them cope in the current crisis. So I think what I've learned from this is how much we can take from people with mental health issues, how much people don't, can learn from those strategies that they've put in place in previous situations to help them work at their best now, really.
Yeah, I think as well, it's been funny. We had a lot of people that were really looking for that flexibility in the work from home before, but as soon as we were, put in that situation, it changed. It was sort of like, oh, I don't know if I like this anymore. And I think it's been interesting to see that I think a lot of people have really craved the structure that they usually have in their day-to-day sort of office-based role. You sort of lose it a bit when you're at home. Is there anything else?
Case of be careful what you wish for, I think, and then suddenly given all of this, it's quite surprising. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I would add that I'm really surprised and delighted how quickly people have mobilised workplace health solutions. So I know a number of organisations that didn't have an EAP have suddenly made that work, and they've prioritised it. Companies that never had any awareness raising, didn't prioritise taking breaks and social communications, they're in there. And so there's been a really welcome shift to bringing mental health into the same realm as physical health. Yeah. And it's been delightful, but also surprising, because it's been under the carpet for so many years for so many organisations.
This is probably a stressful time for a lot of managers as well. When you're a manager and you're looking after your team and the people around you, what do you think those managers can do to make sure that they're looking after their own mental well-being as well?
So I think we forget as well, managers are human, and with this whole COVID situation that we found ourselves in, usually with any sort of change, we are managers and leaders are on the front foot. There's some kind of strategy, or there's something in place, or there's a small group of people, if not everybody, kind of is aware of what this change is going to look like, and they've been putting it the same as everybody else. They've had no front foot, they've had no prior warning. So I think it's also, when we've been working with employees, it's also a little bit about, well, give your manager a little bit of slack as well, because they are only human. So they're not only trying to navigate it from an organizational leadership perspective, but also for their own personal circumstances and what their home lives might look like, and how they might be dealing with the effects of home working. I think it's remembering that this is to recognize really what both Julie and Jo just said about how people are responding to this, and what we've been seeing is lots of managers who are perhaps starting to be a little bit more vulnerable and courageous. So where we've needed that kind of leadership for some time, some of that authenticity and that realness to come through about open conversations that actually, and that's probably quite uncomfortable for a lot of people. And you made the comment before about work, or I don't know if I feel like working from home, and as a leader as well, if you weren't perhaps encouraging that to a wider audience, and there is lots of, trust around working from home, but all of a sudden, all those boundaries you had in place as a manager are now kind of gone in that respect as well. So you're having to put a lot more trust into your employees. So, it's recognizing for you as a leader that you're probably going through some quite steep development learning curve in this process as well, for your own managerial skills and experience. So I think there's a way to be really kind and compassionate to yourself in that, because this is unprecedented for everybody. There's no rule book here. I would suggest, I personally went back to my coach after having had a break from last year, and actually I felt it was a really good time as a leader to have that external voice, somebody I could talk to. So making sure that you've got your support network in place, you've got those people you can go to, and also using your own manager. I think this is a real time to build those connections with your team, but also upwards as well, so with your own manager. And there is that, the whole analogy of the oxygen mask and putting that on first before helping others. I think recognizing that you have to, if you're telling people to take breaks, if you're telling people to not be online first, last off kind of thing, you have to be also role modeling that and being very clear about that as well. And even if that's to the point of almost absurdity of saying, right, I'm logging off now, team, see you tomorrow, which I personally have been doing, just so that people know that's it, I'm off now. And I think those kind of little reassurances make people think, I'm not expected to still be working at 10 o'clock at night or however long. So that role modeling is really important.
Yeah, so definitely sort of as a manager, making sure you're looking after your mental helping first and foremost, and then projecting that onto your team as well. Yeah. I think the trust that you talked about as well is really important as well, because I think trust is so important in this situation as well, and understanding what your staff are going through too. Where we've got a lot of employees that are managing their workload and they've got a lot of other stress on their shoulders as well, like what's the best thing that we can be doing to support our employees? Jo,
So one of the things that we often have found with people who've been off work due to stress and when they're returning, is if you are much better at prioritizing tasks, it can really help. If you break down big tasks into discrete components, it can also really help. And I think some of those learnings are so important for us now when we've got so many other distractions going on around us. Writing a report feels really overwhelming sometimes, and when you only got half an hour where you're going to be undistracted and it's maybe 6 o'clock in the morning and you've got to get on it, having a really clear priority, having a really discrete task in amongst the bigger priorities is really important. So I think as managers we can be very specific and also though give people the flexibility and the control over how they manage that. And I think if we don't know our team well, we're going to really struggle. So we need to make sure that we're checking in an informal way to know what's going on for them. So checking in to say, how are you? Don't worry about the work right now. We're just going to have a personal check-in, because if you know that they've got a son that's really struggling with schoolwork, if you know that they're really worried about their parent being ill, then you can flex your management style around that. And I think this is going to be a long game. We've got a long way to go, and we're all going to go through ups and downs. So if you end up not doing quite so much today, there'll be plenty of time for you to make up for it next week, the week after. And I think if managers can help that happen and be articulate about it, it will help.
Definitely. And I think we've got, you know, a situation now where a lot of companies have put staff on furlough, and then it adds a whole new element to it as well, where you're not just making your working staff feel engaged, but it's also checking in on your furloughed staff who might have, you know, whole other things sort of going on with emotions around being furloughed. What can we do to support those furloughed staff members?
So difficult, isn't it? An unusual thing to suddenly be given an extended period of leave. There's the fridge ever present. You're locked up with your fridge for the day. You can give yourself a COVID haircut. But the ever present is the thought of, how am I now going to go back to work? So it's an enormous task for furloughed workers to be processing all this and to be processing their own feelings. You know, other people are at work, what should I be doing? And all of those things. But I would really encourage employers, managers to check in with people. What can happen is at the start, when all the letters were rushed out to people on furlough, there was all the practical information, how long, how much pay, when it's going to be reviewed. There was probably in there some information about who you can check in with and, you know, the support available. But it's a good idea to remind people of that, because with all the information that comes through, people can just forget what's available to them. So, for example, I had a client a couple of weeks ago who was really upset that they'd been furloughed. They'd taken it as a very personal thing that the company was actually trying to get rid of them. So what I encouraged them to do was pull up the email with the letter in it, and we went through it bit by bit. And they could see it wasn't personal, it was a business decision, it was a section, and they were able to feel much calmer about that. So again, I would remind people about support structures available, the employee support schemes, all those things, counsellors, and to remind people that they can check in with their managers just so that they've got that up to date. And if furlough, which looks likely, is going to be continuing on after 11 weeks, particularly important just to remind people it's there. And the message that you're giving out is not only that there's this available, it's that we care, we recognise this is a difficult time. So look, this is what's on offer for you.
Yeah. I don't know if Jo or Ruth, you've had any other experiences with people that perhaps may have been furloughed and some of the support that they need, or even from clients, like the support that they're needing to provide to furloughed employees.
I think one of the things that we see, so my experience is not so much from furloughed employees, but thinking about what works for everybody when they're on a period of absence from work.
Yeah.
One of the biggest predictors for getting people back after sick leave, whether it's psychological sick leave or something physical, is communication during that sickness absence. And I think we really need to make that come to life now. If you feel valued, if you stay connected, if you feel part of the team, even if you're not doing your work, that's a really important thing. So anything that we can be doing as managers, as organizations, as colleagues to keep people connected is really important. And I think also there, what we could do is we can say, you know, you're going to be off for another month. How would you like to work? What we'd really like to do is just check in every week. Maybe we could have an informal coffee team meeting or something, but what's going to work for you? So you're giving them the control, but you're also making sure that that communication is there.
Yeah.
I would echo Jo's point, and I think that what she's just said is really important. We have a large team of trainers, and obviously those that just purely deliver mental health first aid training, which hasn't been available the 2-day to deliver. So we obviously had contracts that were postponed, and what we found was we were due to hold a quarterly team meeting, so we decided to do it. And although we made it very clear it wasn't really a business update as such, we did obviously talk a little bit about what had been happening in the business since March and what we were trying to do, but and we knew that was sort of work. There is work now coming back on board for those who do more bespoke solutions, but they just loved being able to see everybody and just have, we had a bit of a joke about the things that have really annoyed us, but actually the positives we've really taken from the situation. And actually the feedback afterwards that was coming through on the WhatsApp was just, thank you so much, just lovely to see everyone's face, get to meet some of the team who've joined since I was last here, and I think it just makes a difference just to even have that that night, you know, the positive check-in, and just see everybody and feel that connection. I think that's, you know, what Jo's saying there, it's just that connection that's so important, to feel valued as well.
Yeah, I think we're all hearing, you know, Friday afternoon drinks have turned into Zoom drinks and catch-ups with everyone and things like that. So it's that way of adapting. One of the points we touched on before was just that people will have their good days and their bad days. And I think when you're a manager and checking in with staff, it can be difficult to know like when to check in with people and how frequently you should do it and the best way to approach it. What sort of advice do you have around that?
From a perspective from what I've been delivering from a workshop, which has worked really well, and some managers have said they've been using it, and leaders and clients, is that I've been using, because we use Zoom, and using a poll, and just at the start of every meeting, just doing a 1 to 10 scale. So 10 out of 10, and then 7 to 9, 4 to 6, and less than a 3. And we just and then there's a bit of a joke about that, but actually it's a good temperature check to see how people are feeling. And every session, workshop I've been delivering, webinar, just seeing how people are, just saying what the mood of the day is. And, you know, even if people are a 3, that's okay. You know, that we're all having those different days and acknowledging those, but actually you don't have to be a 10, but how could you perhaps get to a 3.5 or a 4 by the end of today? So just giving an opportunity for a group temperature check, so you can get a feel for, if you're doing a team call, is a really nice way to assess the mood of the team for the day. But I think Jo made the point in a previous answer before about not having those one-to-ones, which are more just about how are things and what's going off, not business priorities, not business objective focus. So I think there'll be some people as a manager you might know quite well, and you'll know their home circumstances, but some people you won't have an idea of what their home setup is. Perhaps they don't often share much in the workplace about their partner or what their home life is like. So I think this is an opportunity where you can start to, you know, check in, find out a little bit more about those people, and it's just position it in that way, though, that this is just wanting to make sure you're okay, and just seeing how you are. It's just not a work catch up. It's just, you know, what's going off and how you're feeling. And some people would really be open to that. Others might be thinking, oh, that's a bit odd, you don't usually do that. But, you know, again, it's that trust. So if it's coming from a genuine and authentic place, and people realize that, it might take a few times before people start to open up, but it's a real opportunity for them to do that. Maybe that's even on a phone call when you're out doing the daily exercise, you know, and you're both plugged in, just having a phone conversation. It's not even a video chat. It could just be a phone chat, and you're out and about for 30 minutes having a chat on the phone, which might also help the person get out of there, you know, away from the partner and the kids, if they want to have a bit of a moan as well about home. So I think it's just recognizing the difference between giving people the space to do that, and also the fact that they've got to be able to trust you. This isn't going to link into something to do with work, or you thinking about them negatively if they're not doing okay. And so it will take, and if you're not usually that style, I guess, as a manager, as Jo said about adapting to that, I think it's fine. It might be quite uncomfortable for you as a manager, thinking, well, I don't usually ask people about what's going off at home, but I think this is a real important time where we do have to start to acknowledge that for people, and just make sure people are safe and well as they're being productive.
Yeah, and I think we're perhaps, for some managers that might not know their teams as well, would you say there's sort of a general like rule in terms of how frequently they should be contacting people, or how do you know sort of when to get in touch?
I think ask the individual, because, you know, if you're at least keeping a one-to-one check-in. I mean, we've kept in 15-minute a 15-minute, half an hour every morning, because we've thought that'd work as a group. And then if we need to catch up one-to-one, we're a relatively small business. But you might find that, you know, your regular one-to-ones, where they always perhaps used to be the meetings bumped in the diary, perhaps they should be the ones that more importantly are kept in. And then just find out what styles. So if somebody does prefer, actually, it'd be great if we could just speak on the phone, and I'll go for a walk, or this time works really well for me when the kids have gone to bed, if you're open to doing a call a bit later on in the evening at 6 o'clock, 6:30. So I think it's asking the individual, which again feels time consuming, but actually you'll probably have a better rapport and find something that works works for them as well. But I think you've got to be mindful that, yeah, everyone's can be sometimes feeling quite even extroverts, and I've certainly felt it, that whole overwhelm of video calls and check-ins and family checking in and friends checking in and then your managers checking in. So balancing it in a way that says, you know, if you want to skip it or it's been too much, that's fine, let's check in at a later point, but making sure that's followed up, I think that's the importance as well.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I guess where we might, we might have employees that have been affected mentally or emotionally by the current situation, like what is the best way for us as managers to approach them? So that might be a good one for you.
Yeah.
So, I think in terms of the way that we communicate, the best way is to be open and honest and be yourself. So if you are, like Ruth was saying, some managers don't find it very easy to open up and even ask the question, you know, how are you? It's a simple question and it can lead to all sorts of things. But I think if you are that manager, just be really open and honest and go, God, this is really hard. I know we don't usually talk about things, but I'm worried about my health and, you know, the way that we're working, and I just want to check in to you. It doesn't need to be mystified and talking about mental health or anything like that. It just means to be, how are you getting on? Is there anything that I can help with? I think one of the things that some teams find really helpful is having a wellness action plan as well. So if you don't know when and how to check in, if you have as a team to say, okay, these are the things that are my signs and triggers when I'm feeling a bit under pressure. So I know for me, and this sounds really daft, but if I start biting my nails and I don't bother to put nail varnish on, I know that actually I'm being too busy with work or distracted at home, that I'm not looking after myself, because I know that I desperately want to stop biting my nails. So that's my first trigger. The next thing is that I start saying yes to everything and I'm overcommitting, and then my business partner is going, Jo, what on earth have you got us into? So if you know your own triggers and everybody else in the team has had a chance to think about them and you're willing to share them, and then say, actually, I'd like you to pick me up on this if you start to see it, because I might not see it myself until I'm too late down the line, then that could be a really thing. And Mind have got a free to download one, or you can create your own, but they are really handy to just have a conversation in a safe space.
Yeah, definitely. Ruth, is there anything else that you sort of seen and you think about on that side?
Yeah, I just think, you know, if you're aware of any kind of already, you know, mental ill health conditions beforehand, or that's already common knowledge, then, you know, just making sure that person is supported. You know, I think the whole piece about recommunicating out to everybody anyway, where they can access the support internally. So, you know, their employee assistance provision, EAPs, Jo mentioned before, the in-house counsellors, whatever support is accessible. You know, because I think that's the other thing, these things are often buried and, you know, can't be found on the intranet system, and people don't know what to ask or know where to ask. So, you know, just making sure that information has been provided again, and it's constant, you know, it's part of the regular comms that's going out there. So it's not being targeted, and it's just more general. And I think Julie made a really good point before about actually right at the start about where people have experienced mental ill health conditions before, or they're just very self-aware. And Jo made the point about biting fingernails, and, you know, I think we're probably, because we work in this field, we're probably very self-aware about all our triggers and what that looks and feels like. But actually, as an individual, just finding out the positives of how people, you know, what are their triggers, but also what helps them keep well, what are their coping strategies, and being able to share those. And the more that people can pull you up on it. And again, with my team, they'll say, you know, I had it in the early days in March, a couple of my team checked in and was like, we think you might not be looking after yourself because of X, Y, and Z. And you sort of go, oh, really? So I think just when you have, if one thing that comes out of this current situation, if people are a lot more open and they are able to share this stuff, which is just totally okay and normal, you know, it's such a good thing to do. So yeah,
definitely. And I think as well, like it could have been easy for people to sort of do the initial sort of checks early on, but then you sort of forget about it a bit. So it's just that continuous checking in as well. Like where we've spoken about people that have perhaps, you know, had some sickness or mental health problems or things like that. Is there anything in particular that we should look out for those sort of employees that have already got existing mental health conditions that might sort of be emphasised with what's happening at the moment?
Again, it goes back to Jo's point about if they're already fully aware of their mental health condition, and for example, they might be worried about, I've seen a lot in the news about in the last couple of days about where people haven't been seeking treatment for other mental health problems, mental health problems, sorry, or other physical health conditions. If they're worried about things like cancer, for example, and not going to their GP or not going to the doctors or hospital if they're worried, because they might be anxious about being infected with COVID, or just they don't want to put the NHS under more increasing pressure and feel like they're burdening. I don't want to be that burden. But I think it's reminding ourselves that all our illnesses, physical, mental, are all valid, and to encourage people that if you think about a mental health first aider's responsibilities, encouraging people as a manager, it's about encouraging people to seek that support. So making sure that if they do have regular appointments with the therapist, they can perhaps do those online, that they're accessing any internal support that might be a stopgap in the interim if they can't access their regular support, and that they are keeping appointments with, for example, their GPs for medication. Personally, that's something, I had to go and pick my medication. I've had to go into Oxford Street a few weeks ago, and that was, even for somebody who, just thinking quite rationally, but actually queuing up and going into Boots and picking up my anxiety meds, and it's kind of thinking, well, do I need to do this? Shall I leave it? Shall I go in? And so it's, even if you're thinking, I'm a rational person, there is a lot of, there is a natural heightened anticipatory anxiety at the moment. So it's just making sure people are encouraged to keep doing the right things for themselves as well, and making sure they are doing what they would do prior to COVID, I guess, as well. Yeah,
definitely. And Jo, what are some of the strategies that employers can use to improve the well-being of their employees whilst they're working remotely?
So I know there's been a lot of things going out around make sure you look after yourself and prioritize well-being, which is absolutely brilliant. And I think that has to be number one. We know there's a lot of evidence that suggests if you keep active, if you keep connected, if you keep taking notice, and just if you're not into mindfulness, then making sure when you go for a walk you look at the trees and you're getting yourself away from your phone and away from the screen and just connecting. So doing those basic things is really, really important. So lifestyle elements, but woven into your day. I think working remotely, though, we've got, number one, thinking about where and when your work's going to happen. So where in the house, I know for a few days at the beginning, I was completely displaced. My husband ended up having the spare room. My kids took over the house, and my normal space, even though I'm used to working at home, was gone. And so knowing where you're going to be, and also when you're going to be on and off, and communicating that to people in your house, whether it's friends or family, but also communicating it to people that you're working with, so that you feel that you can then switch off, is really important. I think the other side is having that social connection. We've talked about that already, all of us noticing how it can be so easy to drop the social aspects of work when we're really busy and we've got other things, but actually those are the things that are going to see us through. So definitely the social side. Looking after our musculoskeletal health. It's easy to get into bad posture, to maybe take the laptop onto yes, exactly. But also making sure we take regular movement breaks as well, not only to help our musculoskeletal pain from developing, but also to make sure we give our eyes a rest, to give our brains a rest, and make sure we're doing something different. So a break isn't taking your phone to the kitchen to look through the news. The break is leaving your phone at the desk and going and doing something completely different. And then finally, I think it's accepting that we've just got to be kind to ourselves. We can't do everything that we used to do. We're not going to, there will be a few people who are more productive than they've ever been, and extraordinarily well done for them. But most of us are just coping and just getting by, and that's absolutely fine. And accepting that some things will just have to wait.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things for me. Things seem to take longer to do at home, or you might sort of set out your day and think, yes, I'm going to stick to this, this and this, but I guess it's easier to be tougher on yourself when you're working from home, and not actually, you can sort of get to the end of a busy day, work longer than you usually would, and think, have I achieved what I set out to achieve today? And that, I think, they're some of the things that can really have an impact on you as well. I've got, I guess, a question for you as well, Julie, like where we're looking at spotting the signs in people, because I think that's one of the other things, like, things like this can build up so easily without you realising. What are some of the signs that are important to look out for if you are managing staff and, they might sort of have their mental health deteriorating? Those things aren't always easy to pick up on a video call.
Absolutely right. And I would also say difficult to pick up in person. In addition to my knowledge about mental health, I had a period of mental ill health myself, and I was trained to be a clinical psychologist at the time. So surrounded by people, and that's their expertise, who really didn't know what was going on for me. So I just want to put it in the context of how difficult it is to look at somebody to assess what's going on for them. Having said that, I mean, there are some things that you can possibly look at. Again, it depends how well you know people. So Jo was talking about fingernail biting, but changes to how somebody usually is can be an indicator that something's amiss. So, for example, sleeping patterns disrupted, appetite changes. You notice that somebody who normally takes care of themselves is really not doing that. Perhaps thoughts can sound a little bit different. So, they might be sort of planning to do something that seems really out of character and really extraordinary. So again, those sorts of things can indicate that something's perhaps not right. Now, you'll never guess by looking at somebody. So what I'd encourage people to do is check it out, ask some questions. And again, people can feel a bit frightened about doing this. If I ask something, am I going to make it worse, or am I going to provoke a bad reaction? But unless you're going to ask some questions, you're not going to get an answer. And again, personally, I would say I really appreciated people just taking time to say, how are you? I've just noticed. Just that in itself was incredibly powerful. So there's a good start. You can just say, well, I've just, can I just check in with you? How are you? I've just noticed that you just don't seem quite yourself. You seem a bit irritable. You seem a bit tense, whatever you're noticing. And, I've done this with clients. I can say in a session, I'm just noticing at this moment, you seem really tense and really frustrated with what I'm asking you. Can I check that out? And then people will come back with, people laugh and say, no, I'm absolutely okay. You've read that wrong. So then you've got more information that can be helpful. Or it might open up a conversation. Yeah, I've got something that, I'm not coping with well. So it's about being courageous. I think Ruth was talking about that earlier, being courageous about asking people. You can get all sorts of reactions, tears, anger, frustration at that point. And again, just to stay with somebody through that as they're expressing that can be enormously helpful. It can help them in that moment to begin to understand that they're not okay. It's a way for them just to reflect in that moment that things are not as they should be, and to verbalize that with somebody perhaps for the first time. Maybe you're the first person that they're beginning to do that with. So look at the signs, check it out. What reaction you get, that's fine. Just go with that. Certainly some of the most powerful ongoing coaching relationships I've had when people have been angry. I mean, I've practically been thrown out of an organization where somebody was so angry, but just sitting calmly, not taking that personally, getting through that can then help people open up.
Yeah.
Certainly if you're having those calls, the other thing I'd encourage is you to have somebody to debrief with, because that can be difficult. So make sure you've got somebody that you trust just to go and talk it over with, so you're not left with that.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if I guess when you're working remotely, it's just harder to see it. But some of the comments I've heard around sort of if people are perhaps quieter on email, or when you do phone them, they're sounding a little bit flat. Are there any of those sort of like day-to-day signs that we can look out for in employees?
Yeah,
Why not? I mean, sorry.
No, you go. You go.
I was just going to say, yeah, check it out. If there's a difference, why not? It's expressing care. We're in this new world where we've got the opportunity to do something differently. So give it a go. What's the worst that could happen, I would say? Sorry, Ruth.
No, sorry, I jumped in there. I was going to say as well, where people are quite introvert naturally, and for them, this might feel a great, part of it's a great time because they're not, having to get their energy from other people. But actually, there's a real danger people can start to feel isolated. So they're not necessarily lonely, but they can start to withdraw. And I think it's what you said there about the emails and there might be less quieter on email, but also in a team meeting. So I think as a manager, just making sure you probably speak last, get everybody to do it, a chat, make sure everybody has a turn, because again, I think those overpowered conversations. I saw something on social media, somebody had commented on Twitter about a Zoom session or a team session they'd been on at work, and everybody, there was people who really dominated the conversation again. So it's about making sure that everybody's voices are still being heard, and those groups around socializing as well, making sure they are as inclusive for everybody, because again, I think those in and out groups have a real opportunity of forming where people might not feel they weren't invited to the Friday drinks. And this isn't double checking in on everybody all the time, but again, just making sure that there isn't an opportunity for somebody to really step into the shadows and really start to withdraw. I think it's just keeping an eye out for that as well, and fine if they don't want to be part of it, but actually just making sure somebody is kept being swept back up into the team, really.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think there are any other issues that employees should have on their radar in the current situation? Jo, again, this might be one for you, where we're sort of seeing all these, whether it could be around home situations or things that are happening external to work that could be compounded by all of this as well.
Yeah, and I think it leads on to what we were just saying, in that we want to encourage conversations that help us understand how we can help, but we also don't need to be the solution. And I think that's really important. So in terms of those issues that we need to have on our radar, we know that there have been, I think the paper said 4,000 arrests for domestic abuse. So there will be workers who are fine on a video conference and experiencing awful things at home. There will be people who have lost a parent or a colleague or a friend and will try to get on with as business as normal. And I think as a manager or as a colleague, it can be really difficult to know how to deal with that emotion. And I think we don't need to be the solution, we need to be there, but also we can have relevant signposting to appropriate advice and support, and that's really important. So whether it's about abuse, whether it's about financial status of people, lots of people experiencing a drop of income. If you've been self-employed or you live with somebody who's self-employed, that's a challenge. People also in terms of increased anxiety about their own chronic illness. I think the chronic illness rates are around about 40-50%. And so there's a lot of people who maybe are worried about what their standard illness that they can function very well with means for how they might return to work and what that means to their long-term prospects. Yeah. And so we need to have these issues in mind, but we don't need to solve them. We need to be able to direct people to the relevant resources. And whether that's something internally in our organization, or if we hear that somebody is experiencing a really difficult time at home, think, oh God, I'm really sorry to hear that, but then follow up with options that they could then follow up. You don't need to take that responsibility to yourself.
Definitely. Ruth, do you have anything to add to that and how businesses can sort of help their staff as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think Jo made a really good point about the domestic violence, because Refuge have seen in the third week of lockdown a 49% increase of calls, on the number of calls, and we've already had 3 women die, unfortunately, sadly, at the risk, and 2 children as well in the first few weeks of lockdown. I mean, this is global as well. It's a huge problem when we're talking about stay safe, stay home, and even children not being safe in their own homes. And so there's a real undercurrent about what's happening in people's personal lives that can affect their performance and what they're doing for work, and the fact that they're not safe. I think Jo's made a really valid point here, and this is about the whole, the whole conversation we've been having today over lunch is about, you as a manager or a leader, you're not always going to problem solve. You're not the fixer. You're not the counsellor or therapist. And sometimes it's that listening ear and it's that signposting. And some of the stuff we've been doing with a couple of our big global clients is we've been running webinars in partnership with experts. So we've had grief counsellors, we've had childhood psychologists talking about juggling work and children's mental health and your mental health. We've had experts on financial wellness talking, especially you might be okay. I think this is really important to recognise, well, the wider home dynamic, that an employee might still be in work, or even if they've been furloughed and they're still receiving some payment, but the other person in the relationship may have lost their job, or they might be self-employed, or so they might have completely lost half a family's income, or a large proportion of income potentially. So I think it's that opportunity to reflect on longer term what this means. And I think when we're thinking about people already having high amounts of debt and credit card debt, and just how that adds another layer of complexity and stress and anxiety to individuals. So I think it's just remembering where all that signposting is, and you can, there's so many organizations, charities, support groups that will run webinars for free, a lunch and learn like what we're doing today, have some experts on, have some proper signposting. Even if they do ask for payment, it wouldn't be a lot, and you can get those people accessible to people in the across the business quite easily, and record it, put it up on your intranet. It's a really good way for people to tap into that resource live as well.
Yeah, excellent. And I guess this is something that is a question for all of you. What are some of the other helpful resources that businesses can use and put in place to help some of their employees that are struggling at the moment?
Well, I think there's always the Access to Work scheme, and that's available for people with mental health, and that's not widely known. So if mental health is having impact on people in the workplace, then there's a government scheme to provide support, which can include things like coaching and software. So that's available. So that's certainly worth looking at. The other thing I would encourage people to do is look at services available locally, listen to their employees about what they found helpful, and gather those resources. There's lots of little organisations out there that can provide niche services that do an excellent job that perhaps people haven't used up to now. So yeah, just trying to get that local information can be really, really useful.
Excellent.
There's also some great online portals. So if you don't have the expertise in-house and you don't have the resources to buy outside, so the Mental Health at Work Gateway, which is a Mind and the Royal Foundation collaboration, that's a really good source of free advice and guidance. But also goodthinking.co.uk is somewhere where it's kind of a portal for loads of NHS approved apps. And so I think there's a danger to put in place lots of things that maybe evidence hasn't proven makes a difference. And so we want to try and avoid doing that and doing the things that we know really make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Ruth, any additional resources?
Where we've worked with lots of organisations who've got mental health first aiders already in their business, and we've been actually running some sessions for the NHS, for NHS trained mental health first aiders. It's just making sure they're equipped, they kind of have a bit of a refresher, or they just feel what are the challenges they're experiencing working, how best to support people working remotely, and also, where they can be found. So again, just refreshers on the basic, when the communication's going out, that everything that my other colleagues have said on the panel is included. So it's just constantly, reinforcing that and keep just making sure that's out there. And if you do use mental health first aiders, or if you do have wellbeing champions that are trained in some internal mental health training, just making sure that those are supported. I think even when I was doing some of the NHS sessions last week, it was almost like, what are their boundaries around making sure they don't take too much on, or they're not worrying about people that potentially they can't see face to face. So I think, again, it's just making sure as a business, if you're pulling on that resource, which is what it's there for, it's really important. That's why those people have volunteered and trained, but actually they're an employee first and foremost, so making sure that they are also not going above and beyond, and they're looking after themselves in the first instance as well, and those boundaries are being established.
Yeah, excellent. And I guess the last area that I want to cover today is around future planning, because I think for a lot of people now, this working from home just feels completely normal. So we're starting to think about what's going to happen when we're back in the office. So how do you think businesses should manage the transition and bringing both current workers and furloughed workers back into the workplace?
Yeah, well, I'll pick up on that one. I think it's going to be difficult in different ways. So whilst we've all been sort of in the storm, I think some of us have been on ships and boats, and others have been sort of keeping afloat with a paddle. So it's very different. We've had very different experiences. So the coming together of people perhaps is going to reflect the differences that we've all had. So that's going to be difficult to manage. So what I would encourage is allowing time for people to talk to each other, to check in on meetings, to check in how people are, to check what strategies and tips they've got to share with each other. Because I think people have learned a lot about themselves, about coping strategies through this. So it's a great opportunity to share those strategies that they've used so that people can support each other going forward. And again, I'd really embrace this new kindness that people are talking about so that people can support each other back. I think as a manager, it's about what tempting how you can look after and do things to. But definitely people are much more likely to be sharing, supporting, so engaging people so that they can think how they can support colleagues, how they can use their knowledge, their experiences to help each other. I think that's really helpful. So I think allowing people to reflect on what they've been through, where they've been, what sort of journey they've been on, and what sort of resources they've taken from that experience to go forward, and sharing that perhaps just at the start of a meeting, or just as a warm-up, you can sort of say, so just going around the room, how is everybody, and anything that you think you could usefully share with colleagues so that we can all learn from this and help each other, just kind of create that culture going forward where possible.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we can really learn from people's experience of being off on long-term sickness absence is that it's a journey. You don't just get back and everything's fine. It's a really long journey, and it ebbs and flows, and it's often really messy, and we don't know quite what tomorrow is going to bring. And I think that maybe as an organization or as a manager or a business owner, you want to provide certainty. And that's what everyone wants. They want an answer of what's it going to look like, who's going to be expected to go in. And we can't give that certainty. And it's probably not going to be helpful to try and make something really rigid and fixed. And so if we can acknowledge that and say, well, we need to think about who's going to come in, what that physical environment is going to be like, give people a chance to plan what might be helpful so that you can give them ownership over that process. So how might you get into work? What are the limitations on that? What's going to be important for you when you do get to work? What might the meeting room look like now? What might the open plan office look like now? Giving those little advanced primers so that when people get to the actual return, it's not so daunting and unknown, but also we haven't put anything in stone so that then it's difficult to come back from.
Yeah.
Because we just don't know. None of us have been through this. And the next 5-6 months, a year is going to be a real kind of balancing act, trying to work out what's working for the business and what's working for the employees.
And I guess finally, we're all talking about sort of doing the catch-ups now. I think that's just as important to do when we're back in the office as well. So what sort of methods should we all be using to keep in contact with our staff once we're back in the office, and just sort of making sure that people are adjusting correctly?
I think one of the things that we found well before all of this happened, we ran a flexible work intervention with a construction company, and one of the things we didn't anticipate was when people are working flexibly, the load on the manager is really quite intense, because they've got to communicate in the organization, in the physical workspace, but they also need to communicate when people are off as well. And so ensuring that we have an agreed, this is where I'm going to give the key information, whether that's on a Zoom call or whether it's in a physical workspace, but agreeing where the absolute vital communication points are, and then being more flexible around it, I think is going to be helpful.
Yeah, I'd add to that what Jo said. I think it's definitely going to shift and change the culture more long term. I think about how organisations not only operate, in terms of with their clients, but also with their employees. And I think where, go right to the back at the start of our 12 o'clock call, and we were talking about trust, and suddenly where employees have been trusted to work from home, or they have been productive and they've still met their objectives. And I think it will really, if organisations choose to embrace this, because I also think once you take everything out, it's very difficult then to put it back. And Jo's point about it's not going to be rigid and this is what it's going to look like. It's going to look probably quite messy, but also there's a real opportunity to embrace a kind of a fresh slate and think, well, how do we want to do business, and how do we want to work together now, and what does this look and feel like for us? And I think where organisations have done that now already in this new world we've experienced in the last couple of months, actually longer term, what's this going to look and feel like for us? And I think it'd be really clear in a year, 18 months, those organisations have really taken this as an opportunity to listen and learn from their employees and themselves, and also adapt that and create, hopefully, as Julie mentioned, really kind culture, where compassion is at the heart of what we're seeing so many businesses that are doing good things and have come out of this in a good way, and it'll be, I think, to go back on that, people will be like, I don't want to work here anymore. That's it. I've actually had an epiphany whilst I've been off that actually I do want to spend more time with my kids, or I don't want to be working in the office until 8-9 o'clock every night in the city. So I think we have to be really supportive of that, because I think we still get the best from people, but in a different way.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's covered a lot of the information we want to go through today. So, and a lot of information that was really useful there. We've got time for a couple of questions, so I'll just quickly sort of whiz through those. First question we've got here. There are going to be a lot of small business owners who are struggling and will feel quite isolated. What advice and help could you offer them?
Yeah, well, I think I understand that being a sole person in my business, it can be really difficult, but there's lots of wonderful opportunities to network people on online, lots of free online networking events. So really encourage you to get along to them and to arrange to do a follow-up call afterwards, because you can just have get to know people as individuals rather than just talk business. So great opportunities at the moment.
Excellent. This next question I think is a really good one. How would you advise someone who is afraid of raising that they're struggling to cope for fear that it will impact their career or job?
I think it's partly thinking about who you're going to raise it with. So often we think we've got to raise it with our manager, and actually there could be somebody else in the organisation we could just talk it through with before we go to our manager. So that's one thing. The other thing I think is really helpful is to practice. So often we have all these thoughts, but we don't actually get them out of our mouth until we're in the moment. And we think, oh, I wish I'd framed it differently. So practice what you want to say and see what feels comfortable, and get somebody to ask you questions that you think your manager might ask of you as well, because that can help you show the facts that you want to put across, but without necessarily showing the vulnerability that you're feeling. Yeah. And those are two tips that might be helpful, but it's a really legitimate concern that a lot of people have. So Ruth, sorry, you.
No, you've said what I was going to say. Exactly that. Practice is one of the things. Is often people when I've run a session, and they'll send me an email afterwards, and they'll say that they'll go through everything. They'll say, should I speak to my manager or should I speak to my GP? And they've actually outlined everything there. And I always say, print that off and read through it, and then take it to your GP, because you've got that there. Or speak to your manager, or speak to, if you've got mental health, if you've got a mental health first aider or an EAP, just call those in the first instance and use those to bounce, like Jo says, bounce the ideas off. Because also I think there's a real, obviously at the moment as well with everybody, there's a real opportunity for us all to kind of get in our heads a little bit. And it's almost that what evidence is also there around some of the assumptions we might be making, especially if we're worried about speaking to our manager, well, what do we have any evidence there that that's going to happen? You know, what is it that's kind of put you off wanting to be open? You know, is there something very clear that's happened? So it's also having a conversation with somebody who's not just going to agree with you, but also be perhaps quite objective and maybe challenge you a little bit as well. It's good to have somebody who can listen, but also kind of, like Jo says, I think, ask those questions that a manager might ask, so it's you're prepared for those. But yeah.
And just briefly, if I could come in on that, I would also look at what you're contributing to the organisation. It's not, poor me, I've got, you know, I'm disabled. It's look at all the things I'm able to contribute. With some adjustments, I can really continue to excel in this organisation. So don't do yourself down.
Excellent. Okay, that's perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ruth, Jo and Julie, your time and input has been greatly appreciated. And yeah, I think that sums us up for today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.